Take it away and welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. We're going to do something a little different. Dakota UU hasn't had a lot of families or younger members for a long time, and so a story for all ages and or reading children's books is not something that uh, we do in this congregation on a very regular basis. And I heard one not too long ago that I really wanted to share, and sometimes it's fun just to get into that space. So the book that I'm going to share this morning is called Desmond Gets Free, and it's by Matt Meyer. And he dedicates it for all those working to build a new world of justice, equity, and compassion. Desmond the mouse lived in the most beautiful meadow in the land. Every morning, Desmond woke with the sunrise and would spend the day playing in the meadow. And every evening, Desmond would go to sleep in the middle of that meadow under the beautiful starry sky. It's a new book, so the pages stick a little bit. One night, though, Desmond awoke when it was still dark out, and he tried to roll over to a more comfortable position, but something wasn't right. Desmond realized that his tail was stuck right to the ground and beginning to throb with pain. He felt behind him, and there was this huge boulder that seemed to have fallen in the middle of the meadow, just on his tail. Desmond pushed on the boulder and tugged on his tail, and he pushed on the boulder and he tugged on his tail, and he pushed and he tugged and he pushed and he tugged, but it was no use. When he was just out of breath and had just about given up, he saw a giraffe nearby in the grass. Good news, he thought. Oh, giraffe, Desmond cried. Could you please push the boulder a few inches to the other direction so that I could go free? The giraffe looked at Desmond and laughed as giraffes do. Silly mouse, said the giraffe. That's no boulder. That's an elephant that has fallen asleep in the middle of the meadow just on your tail. Well, said Desmond, if you could wake the elephant and ask him to roll over just a couple of inches in the other direction, then I could go free. That's right. Well, replied the giraffe, you know what they say about letting sleeping elephants lie. I find it's best not to get involved in other animals' business. I find it's best to just remain neutral in times like these. Desmond quietly replied, well, I do not appreciate your neutrality. The giraffe wandered off, and Desmond tried calling out to the elephant to wake him up, but those giant ears were just too far away on the other side of that giant elephant body. So, again, Desmond pushed on the elephant and he tugged on his tail, and he pushed and he tugged and he pushed and he tugged, but it was no use. When he was out of breath and had just about given up again, a gazelle wandered by. Oh, gazelle, he cried. Oh, gazelle, it seems that an elephant has fallen asleep just on my tail in the middle of this meadow, and I'm stuck, and it hurts. I wonder if you could gently wake him and ask him to roll over just a few inches in the other direction so I might go free. Well, said the gazelle, I see your problem there, but you know what they say about letting sleeping elephants lie. I find it's best not to get involved in other animals' business. I find it's best to remain neutral in times like these. Desmond replied, almost to himself this time, I do not appreciate your neutrality. Desmond tried again to call out to the elephant. He tried again to push the giant animal away. He tried again and again to tug his little tail free, and it was no use. When he was out of breath and had just about given up for the last time, he saw another mouse wandering through the meadow. "My name is Nelson. Nelson, this giant elephant has fallen asleep just on my tail in the middle of this meadow, and I wonder if you might run over and call out into his giant ears and ask him to roll over just a few inches in the other directions so I could go free?" Desmond asked. "Of course," said Nelson. Nelson ran all the way to the other end of that giant elephant body, and he called up to those giant elephant ears at the top of that giant elephant head. But the elephant didn't budge. The elephant heard Nelson's small voice far away, but he felt too comfortable to move. Nelson ran back to Desmond, a little out of breath, and said, "I have an idea. Don't move." He ran off. "I won't," muttered Desmond. A little while later, though, Nelson emerged through the tall grass, and he wasn't alone. Nelson had found 3 other mouse friends to help him, and each one of them had also brought 3 friends. The whole group of them ran over to the giant head of that elephant. One mouse scrambled up onto the shoulders of another, and another mouse scrambled up on her shoulders, and then one after another, they climbed up until the whole group of them had formed a long mouse ladder right up to the side of that elephant. At last, Nelson climbed up the shoulders of his mouse friends, one on top of the other, until he was way up on that giant elephant head, standing next to that giant elephant ear. "Excuse me," he called out right into that ear. "It seems you've fallen asleep on my friend's tail in the middle of this meadow. I wonder if you could just roll over a few inches in the other direction so he might go free?" The giant elephant made a low, giant groan. "Rumph," he said. "I'm comfortable where I am. Go away." So Nelson asked more of his mouse friends to climb up. One by one, they helped each other up the side of the elephant. One by one, they called out into that giant elephant ear on top of that giant elephant head. Again, the giant elephant made a giant low groan. "Rumph, I'm comfortable just the way I am. Go away." Then Nelson had an idea. He whispered to the mice, and then all at once they yelled out together, "Excuse us! It seems you've fallen asleep on our friend's tail in the middle of this meadow. Roll over a few inches in the other direction so he can go free." This time, all those voices together, right next to the elephant's ear, were too loud to ignore. "I was comfortable where I was, but I'll move over if you just agree to stop making such a racket," the elephant cried out. And then the elephant rolled over just a few inches in the other direction. Nelson and the other mice helped each other climb back down, and Desmond was finally free. Desmond and Nelson and all their mouse friends spent the rest of that beautiful day playing in the middle of that beautiful meadow. I just invite you to sit for a moment with the story that we just heard. So today is the spring equinox, and it marks one of the 2 days in the year where the dark and the light are exactly the same. This time of year, the wheel is turning toward the light. Here on the North American continent, we're looking forward to watching the snow melt, the temperature rise, the landscape turn green again. This particular year, we have a new kind of hope as we look toward the end of a global pandemic. In the last 2 years, not only has our way of life been turned upside down, but we've found new and more brutal ways to other each other in the face of fear and uncertainty. And isn't it interesting that as we face diminishing mask mandates and less severe cases of illness, we watch from a distance as wars rage and new fear and uncertainty circles the globe. So a few weeks ago, I had the privilege of attending a service at my home church in New London, Connecticut, via YouTube. I don't often get to sleep in or do nothing, having 3 kids, school, and trying to start a business. This was an unusual phenomenon that I woke to a lazy Sunday morning. I decided to forego my usual race from the bed to the shower to prepare for the day ahead and the week ahead, in lieu of a cup of coffee in my jammies, snuggled under my favorite blanket in front of my favorite window down in the den. And just as I'd settled in, I received a YouTube notice that their service was about to begin, and I decided to tune in. Only 2 days before, I had been talking to someone about a young man named Matt Meyer. I first met Matt at that church in New London in 2014. He travels the country leading worship services and doing music workshops. His service that day was a musical storytelling, followed by a drum workshop. I thought it fitting that he was the guest worship leader on the very first in-person worship since COVID-19 shut down the country back in March of 2020. He's the author of the book that I just read, and his message that morning as he spoke was all about practicing. He opens by talking about his aspiration to be a writer. And he said some of the best writing advice that he ever got came from a teacher who said, "Don't write. For now, just take a few minutes to sit down and write what you would write if you were going to write." And the congregation laughed. It seemed like a silly thing to say. But when we followed his message all the way through to the end, it became quite clear how important that part of it was. See, actually sitting down to write something when all you want to do is write something meaningful that will impact people's lives seems like a very daunting task. So he emphasizes this towards the end of his talk when he talks about someday he wants to be an activist and take on all the injustice and all the wrongdoing in this world so that he can help build a better world for everyone. The problem is, sometimes the end result, actually writing that book, walking that picket line, or challenging that authority, seems so far from where we are right now that it's difficult to even get started. So the advice of that teacher was to just practice getting started. It was brilliant when you think about it, because the act of learning to practice is in fact beneficial on multiple levels. And if you want to go read up on Matt, you'll find that he is an activist and he does all of those things that he talks about doing to build a better world. But he considers himself a practicing activist because the thought that he might not be able to make that difference, he doesn't allow that to paralyze him because he's just practicing doing it. And that was what I loved about Desmond Gets Free and Matt's telling of that story. Desmond asked multiple larger animals for help, and not one of them would help. And maybe they had good reasons to stay neutral. Oftentimes we all think we have good reasons to stay neutral. And for sure, it would have taken them a lot less time to get done what those little mice got done. But those little mice, one by one, each took on a little piece of the work that needed to be done, and they moved an elephant. So I guess my invitation on this spring equinox morning is for us to begin to imagine what we want the coming year to look like. Matt talked about making a to-do list every day, especially during the pandemic, because it helped keep some sort of structure to his day. But the really big things on his list were rarely gotten to, meaning the most important things to him he didn't do very often, largely because he didn't know where to start. He remembered that writing advice from that teacher and decided he might apply that advice to those areas of his life. And Nelson, the little helper mouse from our story, was very similar. He didn't know where to start, so he just did something. When it didn't work, he didn't quit. He tried something else, and he found that part of it worked and part of it didn't, and he still didn't quit. He just kept it going and kept practicing and kept trying something until he made a difference. I relate to Nelson quite a bit because he was trying to do something right, or because he was trying to do something not in fear of being wrong, he wasn't trying to do the right thing, but he was trying to accomplish a particular goal, and he didn't know what the path to success would look like. And I find that's often the case with most of us. It's not necessarily about that right or wrong bit, it's about making a difference. So as we prepare for warmer weather and changing schedules, I wonder, what could we bring to the light if only we were willing to practice?
And now, I'd like to mention that it is with gratitude we give and receive offering and pledge um, funding for our church. And I think all of you have heard the spiel on how to do that, so I'll skip that part. And we will now have our reflections and any questions. We can take your comments and questions. One thing that it reminded me of is a Pete Seeger quote that talked about, um, I don't know if he used the word injustice or whatever, but like the injustice of the world can seem like a boulder on one end of a teeter-totter or seesaw, and all I have is a little teaspoon. And everybody that has a teaspoon adds a teaspoon of sand to the bucket at the other end of the seesaw, and it seems like a hopeless cause in the beginning, but gradually, it can tip the balance.
I love the idea of giving us permission to not be perfect. And what was the phrase you said? Practice writing what you would write if you were a writer. So it takes off the anxiety of doing everything perfectly the first time. So thank you for that.
I know this is not going to be a surprise to any of you, but as I was listening to Krista Tippett this morning, she was interviewing Kate DiCamillo, a children's book author. And even after all of these Newbery Awards, all these wonderful books that she has written, she still is completely amazed oftentimes at what she writes. And she doesn't think about the impact she's got having, or that it's perfect, but she just sits down and writes, and all of a sudden these thoughts come to her that are like she didn't know they were in there. But because she's practicing, because she's writing and listening, she writes these amazing things. So that was really cool too. It was a good serendipitous that I heard that with your talk today, and I would think it was also serendipitous that you were able to hear the service in Connecticut so that you could bring this to us. Thank you.
I heard half of Krista Tippett because usually I don't wake up early, but so often these days I wake up multiple times, and I was so excited when I woke up kind of in the middle, and because I just love Kate DiCamillo and her interviews are always amazing, and Krista's are. So I heard the last half, and then I turned my phone on and went back and I listened to the whole unedited an hour and a half interview. And it was so inspiring and so perfect. And then Barbara, you opening up with the children's book was so perfect because you wouldn't know, but the rest of you all know I'm working on Greenie's children's book. And I just signed up for an online class with, what is her name? Because you might know her. Anyway, I'm blanking on it, but she's a multiple national award winner and lots of children's book. And the class is how to write a picture book. And she has co-written with Kate DiCamillo. So I wrote her a kind of an introductory letter about why I'm taking the class, and that because I already have a lot of work done on, and just wanted to let her know because who Greenie is, so she'll know this is not just an imaginary thing. So that's on April 3rd. So I'm pretty excited about what I might learn and what ideas she might have. And that Barbara, that was so perfect, that perfect example of the power in a simple children's book. That's my goal.
I had an associate minister say once, it was at that UU church in Connecticut, she said, if a child can understand what you're saying, chances are everybody can understand what you're saying. And so we were always mindful about putting those things in services, because even if there aren't any children in service that day, sometimes it's fun to just do something joyful that's meaningful like that. So
Will you say the name of that author again?
his name is Matt Meyer, Meyer.
And it was Desmond
Gets Free.
Gets Free.
It's actually in the back of the book. He has a dedication to Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
Oh,
Is where the name of it came from, because he says, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. And from that quote, Matt wrote this book.
oh, perfect.
And what was the name of the first mouse? I know that was symbolic as well.
Desmond. Oh, Nelson. Nelson, you mean the little helper mouse? Yeah, his name was Nelson.
Yes, I'm pretty sure that's not coincidental as well.
Yes.
That's cool. And I'm going to misquote this, but and was it Martin Luther King, or I forget who it was that said something about the only way for evil to win is for good people to do nothing.
I just put Matt's website in the chat. It's rhythmrevelations.com. And he's actually quite an amazing individual. He lives in Massachusetts in a community home with other like-minded folks that they have space in their home that they often offer to refugees as they're first coming into the country. He travels the country doing worship services and music workshops. And he is primarily UU, but I believe he speaks at a lot of different progressive churches as well. And he's just an amazing individual. So if you have a moment to go check him out, I highly encourage that.
Allison McGee is the name of the person I'm taking the class from, in case some of you teachers might be familiar with her work.
One of my favorite things is NPR used to have sessions of this I believe, and they produced a set of CDs and with all of those essays on there, and one of them was by the singer-songwriter Loudon Wainwright III, and he talked about the songwriting process as a matter of faith for him, and he equated it with like fishing, where you have to have a lot of faith without knowing a lot of what's actually happening beneath the surface, but open yourself up to the possibility. There was a quote, there was something about, it's kind of like that same thing about not knowing where this inspiration comes from. He's bent over his guitar and he's working with lyric phrases and fingerings and whatever on his guitar, and then something comes to him from some unknown place, and next thing you know, he's got a fully formed song. And anyway, it was a kind of a quaint and prescient way of framing it. I wish I could find it. I was doing the search, but I couldn't find it. I think most of those essays are online. But anyway, it's an interesting thing that a lot of creative people that we think of as geniuses for coming up with this brilliant song or poem or whatever, they don't really know where it comes from, and that idea of practicing and being open to wherever it comes from, it kind of comes together. I don't know, I'm not expressing it fully formed, but anyway, it's an interesting process.
You're just practicing, right?
I'm just practicing.
Barbara, I have a question for you. In the Desmond book, the giraffe and the antelope, it was neutrality, and I'm comfortable. The elephant said, I'm comfortable. Do you feel like when people get comfortable, it also affects their spiritual growth? Like maybe they don't want to challenge themselves, or can you speak on that, please?
Definitely. Yeah, because if we're not either going backwards or forwards, if we're stagnant, if we're comfortable, we're not doing anything, right? But we like to be comfortable as human beings. And we actually just had a conversation this past week about that with a group of spiritual directors. We get together, we have to get together every month to, we kind of check in with each other and make sure we're all okay and we don't have questions or needs or anything like that. And we were talking about that growing edge, that we get to that place of comfort and sometimes it's not as comfortable as we think that it is, and something happens that's uncomfortable and we grow to that edge, we find a new edge, and that's really uncomfortable. And then just as we get comfortable with that again, something else happens. And as long as we're open to that spiritual journey, that's what happens, is that we keep going through the cycle of comfort, circumstance, discomfort, comfort, circumstance, discomfort. And that's how we grow, especially spiritually. Because if we stopped with that comfort and never moved into anything that might make us uncomfortable or might make us question who we are or what we believe, we don't grow. And we can see this with, we have a lot more progressive churches nowadays than I can remember from my childhood and young adulthood. But we see that in those churches, when they become comfortable with who they are and what they teach, they also become comfortable judging the rest of the world by what they're comfortable with, right? So yeah, comfort is nice and it can be problematic all at the same time, right?
Isn't there a quote by some minister that says the job of the minister is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable?
Yes. I don't know who said that, but I have heard that. It is true. Mhm. That's oftentimes too, that place of comfort is oftentimes where our privilege comes from. I think, in my experience, because when we get to that place of have, it's hard to, and comfort, it's hard to notice those that don't have, and other people's discomfort. We tend to just gloss over that and not look right at that. And how do you build a just world if you turn a blind eye to the injustice, which is kind of the point of the story, right? That neutrality, that comfort. It's not really conducive for forward motion.
Well, like the elephant in the book, somebody who's comfortable doesn't want anybody to take it away.
Yep.
You know, like, go away, leave me alone.
Mm-hmm.
And that can go farther than just not doing anything. It can go into preventing other people from progressing or whatever.
Well, it can even go farther than that, into control and violence towards other people, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I was thinking about your statement of that. Being comfortable, something happens, you get pushed to the edge, but you keep going. If you think about, the phrase, I just want things to be normal, maybe that, it's really like saying maybe normal and comfortable are really synonymous, where I just want to go back to being comfortable. I want to go back to being normal. And I keep thinking, no, I don't want to go back to normal. I don't want to go back to 2, 3, 4, whatever years, what was normal then.
Yeah.
But normal, it's those amount of change that occurs. Little change at a time does allow you to move forward or change your normal without it hurting too much.
Yeah.
Doesn't push you to that edge. But then what I also going back to like, science and physics, it's like most systems try to find and reach equilibrium.
Mm-hmm.
You drop a pebble into the pool, the waves go out, but eventually it's going to all settle back down to being still. Hot and cold, it's trying to, it's not the, heat's trying to become equal.
Yeah. And current, wants to flow to the path of least resistance, and yeah, there's a lot of analogies. We should probably.
Are we? Oh, yeah.
Just one more thing, Chuck. I'm just wondering though if that's how people function. My spiritual director will not use the word balance because balance implies a stress of trying to maintain that teeter-totter. She prefers to use the word harmony because we don't, as humans, that balance doesn't come naturally for us. We have to work at it. So what if we live in harmony and not balance?